start. Good evening. Glad to see everyone here. 60 Stellenbosch University top performing academic students either in their final year or postgraduate level have been selected for what we hope will be a wonderful new experience at Stellenbosch University and at the University of Leuven. And this is the start. This is the start of what we hope to be a wonderful, enriching, interesting, strange, difficult, pleasant experience for both you and for a number of other students on campus and our academics. And hopefully during this evening the conversations will start, the complexities will start to arise and we can take it further. A special word of welcome to our deans that are here. Prof. Barnett het ek hier gesien, Professor Hartung, tweede kader verskoning gemaak vanaand se geleentheid. Clearly the deans are perhaps even more excited than the students to engage around the topics. I hope also after this evening's session the conversations with the faculties can continue. From Student Affairs, Senior Director Dr. Rooi is here and this program is hosted while embedded within the Division for Student Affairs in collaboration with the Postgraduate and International Office, and I look forward to see how our relations, Dr. Rooi and Huba, how we can further engage also around the topic. Ander universiteitsbestuurslede, Prof. Eugene Kloete en Prof. Aaron Skoonwinkel is ook vanaand hier. Baie dankie, het is baie lekker dat julle ons aan kan sluit. And I think the community says something, well, the gathering, who is in the gathering, and part of the gathering says something of what it is. Professor Barnett will be introduced later, but I can say this, Johan, without any doubt, indicated that we cannot start this event if you are not here. So we're extremely fortunate that you could make it. You had engagements at the University of Cape Town earlier today, and tomorrow at the University of the Western Cape. So we're extremely fortunate to have you here, and Johan will be introduced later. My colleagues, Dr. Johan Fourie, wat die academische coördineerder van wezenlijk begon, en oud studentenmaat en vriend Huba Boshoff van die Navraagse Internationale Kantoor. Het is lekker om op een ander vlak op jullie saam te werken. Ik zie baie daarna uit. This evening in Leuven, a group of 15 or so students on that side will also meet. So it is also special to know that in this future city, they are also engaging and meeting and greeting each other as we are in South Africa and in Stellenbosch. Yesterday our country celebrated 25 years after the release of President Nelson Mandela. And I think in that event, in our reflections, something of the future South Africa was symbolized in the steps of Madiba leading in a free South Africa. And I think that was extremely special and good that we can reflect on it. And I think it's symbolic that the start of the future of South Africa 25 years ago can be complemented by a conversation about the future of our cities, the future of our being, the future of our identities as citizens in a city can complement the idea of thinking differently, thinking new, engaging differently, doing differently, and making sure that the futures that our forefathers, mothers wanted to see, and I suppose in what degree you might bring and measure it, will see and are seeing, can also be the conversation when we gather and think about the topic, creating or enabling us to think and see the city of the future. And I cannot think of a better audience to start that conversation. I cannot think of a better audience through your motivations and your engagements to start that conversation in Stellenbosch. And I cannot think of a better partner or partnering relationship intercontinentally to complement the conversation here at Africa and in Western Europe through the year. We hope that it's an exciting conversation, as I said, filled with, I suppose, fun in discovering what can be new from your field of study and your engagements as citizens of the country and as students in a particular faculty at Stellenbosch. And I hope that the complexities will help us to, on a daily basis, think differently. And perhaps, who knows, we will discover that after 6 o'clock, the city of the future might work without any electricity. Perhaps that will be part of the discovery. And perhaps we will be surprised at what the possibilities can be. It is a partnership that Huba will speak about later, but it is our hope that it will also be a long-term partnership, not only around the theme, but in conversations with the community. I think it is a special venue to start off a discussion about the future. Because right next to us, I suppose the platform for talking about what the future can be, is next to us. The story about our history as a university and as a town can and must also lead to the story about our future and our futures, the stories that will be, the stories that can be, and the stories that future generations will tell. So I hope that with the platform, the environment, the wine definitely, I hope that stays part of the city of the future, and the food in whatever form we will have it, that we can connect with what we experience today, that we can relate to what has happened in the past, also when people dreamt of and worked towards having a different future, and that hopefully history will judge us positively after our story or chapter in what we hope to be the future, and specifically in as much as it relates to creating what will be the city of the future. Baie dankie. Dis baie lekker dat ons dit vanaand so kan doen. I will call on Boshoff to introduce the ethos behind the partnership and also the link between the think tank and other Stellenbosch and Leuven links. Thank you, Huba.
Think tankers, I think if there's such a word as think tank, if not, then we created tonight. It's also part of creating a new vocabulary for the city of the future. This is a very exciting opportunity. If I think of the SU-KU Leuven Stellenbosch collaboration, then it's this big animal that we are able to work with. SU-KU Leuven was one of the very first international institutions that engaged with Stellenbosch University. In fact, the furthest back that we can get that we have something on paper is in 1993. So even before our new regime came into governance, we had links with SU-KU Leuven. And in the past more than 20 years, we have really grown this relationship, fostered it, nurtured it, where it is now what we call our first preferential partner. So in a sense, this is also my pet project. SU-KU Leuven is my pet project. And in the office, people say, this is the only thing that I work on. I wish. But it is really a significant agreement for Stellenbosch University to work on. When we were approached by SU-KU Leuven to enter into this preferential partnership, we said, well, how does this differ from our other partners? And our late rector, Professor Boshoff, was very instrumental in this. And one of the things that he said even before this partnership is that Stellenbosch should be significantly different and significantly better. And this partnership is definitely a vehicle for us to achieve that. And I also want to pay homage to it because in the text you can really see what Robert would refer to as Bodman speak. We can see the ethos that he looked at, alleviating poverty, good governance, that really comes through in this agreement. And I think this activity is yet another one of the activities where we can pay homage to our late rector. A university partnership can very quickly become something that's on paper, and we have a whole drawer full of those that is just on paper and nothing ever happens. For me, as the coordinator of this agreement, it is very important that whatever happens in this agreement must have a long-term effect and must have a very wide reach. And so this think tank is very significant for us. It is the first agreement in which we have such a student activity. For the university partnership can also very quickly become something for a select few academics. The SU-KU Leuven partnership offers us the opportunity to work as an institution. And I hope to the students tonight that you could see what high level of commitment we have on the institutional level with 2 vice-rectors, the deans and senior management being here tonight to share in this, shall we call it, the launch of the think tank at Stellenbosch University. So I hope that through this year we can journey through and that we can think into. It is really an exciting opportunity to be able to work with a select few, the best of the best, the cleverest of the cleverest at a university as Stellenbosch. It is a great opportunity for us to work together in different departments. I've worked with Leslie in a number of other projects as well. But this is not a credit for sale initiative, it is not a postgraduate international initiative, it's a Stellenbosch University initiative. And I hope that this think tank can create lasting networks for you as the students, and then in 2 years' time, when we have the third round of the think tankers, that we can call on you as the alumni of the think tank to say, please help us in this endeavor. So I look forward to see how you as the students also engage with this opportunity of an international partnership that is really far-reaching and that it has a very long legacy and which we believe that in 20 years will still be standing.
Thank you. Now, all of us, well, there was a lot of conversation before and a lot of things that of course we couldn't agree on when we started the conversation. But one of the things that we did agree on is that perhaps the one thing that will not be problematic in the city of the future will be our economy. And we deliberately then decided to invite someone from the Department of Economics and from the Business Management and Sciences arena, Dr. Johan Fourie, to coordinate the program Think Tank with us. And I'm very excited, Johan, becoming even more excited after the start of the program and to see your own stamp and uniqueness fulfilling, I hope, what will be a future of better economics that we will also see. Baie dankie, Johan, and baie dankie.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks, Leslie. When I was approached by Leslie and Huba at the end of last year, towards the end of last year, I was skeptical initially because this is a big time investment, and time is, as economists know, there are constraints, and time is one of them. But there were two reasons why I accepted. First is that Leslie and Huba is part of this, and it's fantastic to be working with people that are capable and productive and excited and passionate with you. And another one, perhaps linked to the first, is that obviously working with them, but also working with students that I know are handpicked. I signed up before, I knew the students, so, but I knew that they told me that this would be the 16 best students at Stellenbosch University, so that is fantastic. And the second reason, though, is that economists see themselves sometimes, I suspect, as the kind of imperial science that we tend to see. We know a lot about other fields, which I know is not entirely true. And so I challenge myself to invite seminar contributors or presenters from an array of different fields, so that we are exposed to new interdisciplinary work, perhaps, that we can challenge ourselves into broadening our own horizons in terms of our disciplines. And I think that's partly what at least if I look at the first semester of seminar contributors, then I certainly think that we've managed to do that. There's only one economist that's going to speak. So I'm very excited about the program. Perhaps I should just, for those that are visiting, but I'm sure the students also want to know what is going to happen. We've got pretty much once a month, we've got a seminar where we would meet like this, probably not in this venue, but inside, with loadshedding allows us. And we would have one seminar of about 45 minutes where we've got invited speakers. The first is actually at the end of this month. It's Rashid Qatar, who is from Future Cape Town. It's an NGO in Cape Town who is working on urban issues. He would present, or she would present, and then there would be a half-an-hour discussion where we really, a critical discussion about the things that have been said, some of the issues that have been addressed, and all in the back of our mind we would always have this issue, like what do we consider are the most important questions that we're running for the city of the future. We will discuss these questions as time goes by. So Rashik will be at the end of the month. Then we've got someone from the heritage background, so that's looking at the history and how do you protect this history in the city of the future. Then we've got someone from Stellenbosch University who will be taking us from a completely different perspective. He's from the arts background, fine arts. So that's going to be interesting, talking about space, which I really must admit I know nothing about. So I'm looking forward to that certainly. And then we've got the economists. We've also got, perhaps that's for the women here more interesting, we've got Tim Harris, who's the CEO of Westro, former, I think, PA parliamentary member of the provincial parliament. So we look forward to some interesting discussions. Tonight, though, I am very happy to also have someone here that I must admit was a very coincidental arrangement, because a week ago I was kind of supposed to give a keynote, and I know that, again, I don't want to hammer on this, but as an economist I have a very specific view of the city of the future, and as an economic historian actually I would have said something about the past, but the only thing, the only thing about the past that I think is kind of interesting is that if we think about the past in 1960, for example, if you think that's roughly about 50 years ago, the world was a very different place. We tend to think, perhaps our generation, that although things change quite quickly, things are kind of set in stone. If you're younger, you tend to think that if you're older, I guess you're going to realize things change over time quite a lot. But in 1960, the World Bank said, Africa is the continent of the future. Africa, I think the quote from the World Bank report was, the future for Africa is bright. And actually the continent we need to worry about is East Asia, because they don't have any resources, there's nothing. I mean, there's mass poverty, population growth is high, and then we know kind of the consequences, well, not the consequences, but we know what happened in the last 50 years, or at least the 40 years following that, from 1960 to 2000. East Asia became the hub of economic growth, Africa seemed to stagnate, and so the future really can be very different than the present. I think that's really something that can inspire us to kind of learn from different fields. If you think of 1960 again, the one quote that I always find fascinating is that the kind of GDP per capita wages of Tokyo were similar to wages of Lagos. I think that's kind of a crazy idea to think of it, that it can change so rapidly. And so again, in 50 years' time, if we look back to this day, how different would the world be? And I think that's something worth exploring, something worth thinking about. And to help us think about that, I've got a visitor here who, as I said, we kind of arranged this very quickly, and I'm very happy that he's in South Africa for this. His field of expertise is actually, why do people think about the city and the future of the city? So I mean, that's the perfect keynote you want for a theme like this. Professor Clive Barnett is from the University of Exeter. He did his undergraduate studies at the University of Cambridge, PhD from the University of Oxford. He's been to several institutions also in the States, Ohio, and he's now back in the UK at the University of Exeter, and we look very much forward to what he wants to share with us, about 15 to 20 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Johan, in particular for inviting me. I was aware of this camera out there. And also, just because I was sitting there about 5 minutes ago, you won't be able to hear me because of the noise. But fortunately, to the always look on the bright side of things. I'm going to refer. I might end up referring to my notes. And my excuse for that is that I don't necessarily have a clear, coherent narrative of what the future city is. What I have is a series of questions and queries, and sort of maybe a kind of a half-baked framework for thinking about why everybody's interested in the city, basically, these days. So I'm going to kind of try and share you some of the questions, and perhaps one example of an interesting process through which essentially everything has become urbanised in a certain way. So I'm here in South Africa at the moment because I have a fellowship, research fellowship funded by the Lithium Trust, Charitable Research Trust in the UK, to look at what's rather grandly called the urbanisation of responsibility, or much more broadly just the urbanisation of everything. By which I mean, why is it that a whole series of policy fields, whole series of academic disciplines, whole series of activist and advocacy fields that have previously not really thought about the city or the urban, are now kind of interested in that sort. So that's what I'm kind of trying to think about. So I'm going to start with a question for the students, the grown-ups, not the should sit on your hands. I'm a geographer, and a social scientist specifically. So therefore I belong to a kind of set of discipline traditions in which city and urban focuses have always been central. Urban geography more generally, urban and regional planning, regional science, perhaps architecture. Those are fields in which people talk about space all the time and we think we know what it is. So there's a set of established traditions. But so I'm going to ask you very quickly, well not necessarily kind of, I won't ask you, quick show of hands. Who's a geographer? Any geographer? No? Okay. Anybody planners? Any planners? No? Okay. Any architects? No? Okay. So there's nobody here from the tradition spatial discipline. Okay, that's good. That's good. Any engineers? Good. Right, that's excellent. Theologians, somebody mentioned earlier on. Okay. Any other social scientists, sociologists, or okay. Right. Okay. I hope not to leave anybody out. But that's excellent. Because in a certain sense, therefore, you're kind of proving a point that lies at the heart of my project, which is that, pardon that question, it's got nothing to do with you. Why are you interested in this? These are not disciplines, classically, which are thought of their objects in the humanities, in the natural sciences, in the environmental sciences, in engineering. In a certain sense, they might always be worried about transport systems or certain sorts of things, or things taking place in places. But the ways in which all of those fields that we all come from have become interested in the city seems to me to be an interesting one to ask about. Now, I suspect that in all of those fields that you're familiar with policy documents or academic discussions which start by saying something along the lines of these days more than 50% of the world's population live in cities, but some variation of that. Those statistics are kind of really interesting, highly contested. So those stories about the urbanisation of population, the idea that the world is now majority urban, they can be broken down in all sorts of interesting ways. Sometimes it's a simple majoritarian argument that most people, more than 50%, live in cities. Sometimes an idea about, there's more cities. Sometimes it's a story about the fact that cities are different now, that they're bigger, they're going to continue to be bigger, which is not necessarily the case at all. But we're all sort of familiar with that kind of frame. As I said, one thing which is worth bearing in mind is that the way where those statistics come from themselves are brilliantly contested in various sorts of ways. I came across a fun contrast the other day. You can kind of run with this in all sorts of ways. Apparently, Sweden defines an urban settlement as something like 200 people, whereas Mali defines an urban settlement as 40,000 people. So and that's one of the standard stories, is that the statistics upon which urban trends are based are actually highly variable. Sometimes they're just based on numbers, sometimes they combine numbers and functions. I love that contrast because it's sort of entirely counterintuitive. The idea that Mali thinks that to be a city really quite big. I don't know what the population is there. Those sorts of issues are already problematizing what the city is. So, my starting point in the project I'm working on, I'm going to share to you, is this idea that there's a series of discourses, national policy level, certainly in South Africa, certainly in the UK, then more globally at European level, UN level, around the idea that cities are changing. They're both in the sense that what urban places are changing in all sorts of ways. That then, therefore, in turn, creates a challenge of how might they be changed in particular ways. So there's the line, the urbanisation responsibility, is supposed to kind of get at this sense that, on the one hand, cities, processes of urbanisation, urban places, are understood to generate all sorts of consequences, and in particular, generate all sorts of challenges and problems. So cities these days are understood to be key to the generation of climate change problems, like carbon emissions, that sort of thing. That's a standard story. Cities are understood to be key. Certain narratives, the global financial crisis in 2008, could be understood as caused by a whole set of investment patterns in built environment and bad mortgages in the United States in particular. So across a whole series of fields, ones you'll be familiar with, is this idea that not only is everybody living in cities these days, but therefore that's causing all this chaos, it's causing all these challenges, potentially, if not actually, a whole series of problems. So there's essentially sort of backstories. Oh Christ, what's going to happen if everybody lives in cities? What happens to power systems? What are the energy consequences of this? What happens to patterns of inequality? So across any number of fields, you can see that story going on. The world has become more organised, and that generates a series of challenges, problems, more or less disasters. On the other hand, nobody really ever says that without then saying, on the other hand, cities are quite key to addressing all of those challenges. So there's an interesting process by which cities are understood as both fundamental to generating problems, challenges, which aren't classically just urban ones, but are global ones. At the same time as a whole series of arguments in different fields about cities being key to addressing certain sorts of global challenges. If you want to eradicate poverty, if you want to address climate change, if you want to establish various forms of sustainable living, the city, in one way or another, is increasingly understood as the core actor. So you have this kind of dual sense. That's all I mean by responsibility, in a sense. It's beginning to break down the word responsibility into a sense of how things cause and what do you do in response to things which are problems. So, and there's an interesting way in which the city, or the idea of the city, or the urban, has become the focus for this dual, on the one hand, on the other hand, story. So, at this moment, the thing to kind of, if you're following me so far, the thing then to slow down about is to notice that across those different fields, and I've only mentioned a couple of them, you could begin to generate more, and you probably will in the course of this program. Across those fields, what the city is, or what the urban is highly variable. Nobody, again, if you had time, go around and say, well, give me a one-line definition of the city, or the urban, you'd get 17 different understandings. So sometimes what people mean by the city is a sort of an image of kind of a compact agglomeration of people, or perhaps an agglomeration of economic activity, a classic understanding of what the city is in economics and regional sciences, the idea of the agglomeration of industrial and other economic activities. So sometimes you get the idea of a city as something very clearly starkly offset against something else, the countryside or the kind of a location sense. That's one version of what the city is, very important in certain fields. In other fields, the city actually might be understood as not necessarily kind of specific location, but really as a term for kind of material infrastructures, which is the reason why why the engineers here, essentially. So a very strongly infrastructural sense of the city, which is, people have always worried about infrastructures, but there's an interesting crossovers between them, engineering, natural sciences, social sciences, thinking about infrastructure in various sorts of ways, and the material qualities of roads and railways and cables and sanitation networks and so on. So that's a different kind of image of what the, in a sense, not the city anymore, but of what the urban is. And the third one, I'm just going to throw this more than three, but I like thinking of these. And this would be an understanding of the city you get perhaps classically from political science, from planning. Isn't so much kind of an idea of kind of agglomeration or concentration, not sort of demographic or even spatial sense. It's not an infrastructural one. It's a sense in which the city is understood as a political unit, it's a scale of governance. So when people, in that context, when people say the city is crucial for dealing with climate change, what they mean is, of course, city government, in particular city government, but then in turn assumes it claims that somehow city governments might be more accountable, more democratic than national governments. Assumes claims, understandings, which we could contest, and then there's claims that somehow local governments are closer to the people, or closer to, or more sensitive to particular types of problems. So you could kind of continue to map, as I said, a whole series of different understandings of what the city is. And I suppose one of the things I'm just suggesting to you, but that's what you might want to do. I suspect you will find yourself doing that in the program you're working on. But some of you are going to become thinking of the city in certain sorts of ways. Some of you might not even think the city is a coherent concept. There's a series of debates in urban studies in particular at the moment, essentially arguing that there's no such thing as the city. If we really want to grasp significance of contemporary urban processes, we could give up the concept of the city, because it leads us to the sort of thinking very stark kind of contrast to the city. countryside and so on. Yeah. I'm not necessarily endorsing those, but I'm simply getting at is that, in a certain sense, rather than trying to think there's a single definition that you can nail down, and you might find from somebody from geography or urban studies, run with the diversity for a while. You know, if I were organising a programme, the first thing I'd do in the first section is to almost go around the table and say, well, what do you think the city is? Give me a definition of what the urban is, and then sort of begin to flush out what's really going on. So maybe my final point, if you don't ask me, I would stay at that. So we have a sense of, first of all, this particular framing of the urban or the city is kind of responsible for things which are potentially responsible for acting or alleviating servitude. Secondly, we have a much more obvious sense of the variability of what people are talking about. It might look like everybody's going on about the city, but actually they're going on about they're interested in very different sorts of things. That's one place you could just stop and say, well, actually everybody means different things by it. As a kind of analytic, as a way of kind of going a bit further, I think it's an interesting kind of way of proceeding. If you do that exercise, go around the table and say, what do you mean by it? What's next? I think one of the interesting things to notice is that sometimes when people talk about the city or urban processes, they might not really be interested in urban things at all. Urban might become, or the city might become, a useful vector, a useful agent to address certain sorts of other things. So, faced with somebody with a particular definition or a particular way of talking about the urban or the city, I think the key question to ask is, what's their problem? What is it? What's in a particular policy field, or a particular field of activism, or a particular field of kind of technical expertise? What are the worries, what are the anxieties, what are the difficulties that are shaping the debates and the concerns that have led people to decide that actually the key way of understanding this issue, problem of water dynamics, or problem of inequality, or problem of poverty, or problem of governance, whatever it is. What is it that's led them to think that the city, all the things it could be, is the cause and the solution, potentially, to their problems? So, I think there's often a tendency in these kind of discussions around spatial concepts, actually, the city and so on, to get hung up on definitions. So there's a way of kind of keeping hold of the fact that there's a lot of variability without getting hung up on definition. I'm suggesting you sort of think of the sidestep, the question of what the city is, or what the urban is, and just start asking questions about not what's your problem, but what is your problem, what's my problem? And actually there might be some interesting connections. How are urban issues, discourses of the city, discourses of urbanisation, thought of as being problem fields? So, Calvino is very famous talking about cities, which goes through a whole series of variations on what cities are meant classically, different sorts of conditions. And what he's getting at is this idea that actually the urban in particular is really the name for a series of problems. It's not the name for a location or the infrastructure field. That the city classically is understood really as the name or the kind of the term for a whole set potentially of variable problems. So that's my final kind of point for you. It's not really a solution. It's kind of really suggesting to you a way of kind of proceeding, particularly this kind of really interesting, I think, sort of properly transdisciplinary encounter which get people in all sorts of different fields, vaguely, I guess you've also got on the course, so you're vaguely interested in this thing. And it's like, well, how do you kind of find common ground? And I think one way of getting that, certainly the starting point, is to kind of not sort of say what do you within the city, what do the urban is, actually what's really interesting, what's really your concern, what's really the difficulty that you're engaged with. And therefore, what does the city or the urban do for you in that context? It might be just quite a nice way to proceed. Kind of one of the ways I'm trying to pursue the project. Might not work for you, it's currently working. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the idea is that...
Stand up.
No. That's fine. The idea is that over a glass of wine and having something to snack on, that we continue the conversation. And that's fine with you. And should there also be questions and queries or points of interest that we further engage with you. And also the two vice rectors, Dr. Ludolf Boot of Student Affairs, colleagues Nico, a variety of portfolios, focus from the Leadership Institute, and our deans to have that conversation. It is not only the formal way of meet and greet event, but also an engagement. But for the next 30 minutes to an hour or so, we'll enjoy something to snack on and something to drink, and hopefully fruitful conversations. Thank you very much for coming, and I trust that you'll enjoy the evening.